Okay, I think we can start. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the last session of this History and Class Consciousness marathon. My name is Dimitra, and I will be moderating our last discussion. Special thanks goes to Historical Materialism Journal that is hosting this event, and to our comrades Mariana Teixeira and Victor Strazzeri, who brought all of us together and coordinated all the preparations. We are 10 comrades from 7 different countries, and I will introduce you to all of them. So Eden Young from the Netherlands is here, Giovanni Cianotti from Brazil, Konstantin Baehrens from Berlin, like me, Victor Strazzeri from Sao Paulo, Mariana Teixeira from Lisbon, Ankica Chakardic from Zagreb, Kostas Goussis from Athens, Alexandros Minotakis from Dublin/Athens. Yes, so the 10 of us met for the first time in this constellation last April in Athens in the historical materialism conference, and the marathon we are participating now is the digital version of the original marathon that took place in Athens. Yes, and maybe a few words about it for people that attend our streaming for the first time. This year we are celebrating the centennial of George Lukács' History and Class Consciousness. So this is the reason that brought all of us together. And it has already mobilized vast readership worldwide this year. We know that History and Class Consciousness, HCC, is quite a peculiar work. It is a collection of essays, mostly published before the publication, some written for it, with dates but not in chronological order. And it aims to reconstruct orthodox Marxism after the political collapse of the Second International. And still it does so by engaging with other currents of thought. Yes, I will not say more about this because we will have time to discuss several aspects of the work. The discussion, this roundtable, will have the following form. Each of the 10 of us will be talking for about 5 minutes. And at the end, we will have 20 to 30 minutes to open up the discussion for Q&A. And yes, I would say let's start. And I think the first one to start is Konstantin. So there you go.
Yes, thank you, Dimitra. According to our schedule, I'm just shortly going to tell you about how I first came to read History and Class Consciousness, why I still think it's important to read it, and also maybe what I think might be its political relevance today. If I remember correctly, it was during my studies and while I was reading Walter Benjamin that I first thought I would like to read the source so many people are pointing at, because it is quite a common understanding that Benjamin was greatly influenced by history and class consciousness. And at the time, I was interested in the concept of phantasmagoria in Benjamin and also second nature. And I thought, well, let's look into this book and find out more about reification and fetishization possibly also. But I think during my first reading, I found it difficult to detect a consistent definition of those of the concepts I was looking for. But I think when I look back to this time from today, there was very few things I knew back then, and maybe a little more today, but there's still very much to learn. And why do we still read this book? I think it is typical that we are gathering together at this centenary, because these are the dates, and the book has greatly influenced a lot of people. Already in the 20s, as I mentioned, Walter Benjamin, Ernst Bloch also. I think you can see the influence on Karl Mannheim and his Ideologie und Utopie. So the one of the main sources of the creation of sociology of knowledge and so on. So I would maybe turn the question around and ask, is it possible not to read it? Because it has been so influential and still is, that yeah, it's hard to avoid it. Of course, regarding its political relevance, it combines many important topics from different perspectives, and therefore you can learn a lot from it, I think. Still, of course, you can't take it dogmatically and just try to apply everything that's written in it on today. But I think I'll stop here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks a lot, Konstantin, for this smooth introduction that makes sure, hopefully, that our audience will not jump away right in the beginning. Yeah, many important topics, and let's keep the question, is it possible not to read Lukács? So the next speaker is Ankita Chakardic.
Yes, and hello to my fellow panelists, and of course to audience. And let me repeat again that I would like to thank Paul and HM for hosting us, and many thanks to Victor and Mariana for herding us this way, and maybe even like pushing us more to think about Lukács, even though he was there, but maybe not in this particular sense that we try to suggest with our marathon. So what I would like to share this small expose on HCC is something that I think is rather neglected usually in reading this book. This is the relationship between Rosa Luxemburg and Lukács. And I don't know why is that like a usual approach, that somehow this connection is neglected. I see it as important for several reasons, and I will try to point several points. First of all, I think that what brings Lukács and Luxemburg closer is the question of method. The concept of totality, contradiction, and dialectics. What actually brings them close is mainly critique of mechanical approach of neo-Kantians versus dialectics as total and moving principle of thought. It is interesting to note what I already pointed out in my presentation on Monday, that in fact, with these 20 pages that Lukács devoted to Luxemburg in the essay from 1921, Luxemburg's theory appeared for the first time in Marxist philosophy as a system. So this is rather, I think, important. We already discussed that, but I think this kind of relationship between revolutionary philosophy and the approach to Luxemburg as a philosopher is really interesting and a potential one. Then, regarding the question of method, in opposing neo-positivist and neo-Kantian versions of Marxism, both Luxemburg and Lukács viewed Marx theory primarily as supplying a method of investigation rather than a complete system of some unimpeachable categories. So it is not true that socialism will arise automatically and under all circumstances. History is not an entity independent of consciousness and practice, but instead it is a field of subjective intervention through action. And this is something that both Lukács and Luxemburg pointed out through their theory, but also with their practical engagement. Then, besides this point of method, the second question is the question of historical materialist method. History is not an indefinite line of development at the end of which socialism appears as a distant goal and thus lacking all practical interests. Both of them, both Lukács and Luxemburg, place the dialectical conception of totality of the historical process that proceeds by contrasts and antinomies. They're both fighting the approach that implies the separation of the dialectic from the living material of history, which ultimately means the disruption of the dialectical unity of thought and existence. Then the third point that I would like to point that brings Lukács and Luxemburg together, which somehow intersects in the question of method and history, is they both share the mood for epistemological optimism. So Marxism is an open project that needs to be developed and which has to be taken into account, especially regarding the new historical and social facts, in order to understand the development of capitalism. So it is a kind of interesting point, which I would like to also direct toward the reading of the Praxis Yugoslav School and the Marxist humanism, which again brings Lukács and Luxemburg together. And finally, they both share the mood that it is not enough to be politically committed for or against capitalism. One had to declare one's theoretical commitment to. That means that both Lukács and Luxemburg advanced a concept of necessity that protected the proletariat's freedom to act, yet neither seriously doubted that when the proletariat finally did act, it would do so rationally and thus bear out the necessity of communism. And this is really important and something that I read in the lines of both Lukács and Luxemburg. And then again, this is something that maybe we can discuss later. The problem of reading Luxemburg always as a spontaneous brings several problems. And I think that someone who actually participated in the co-organizing of Communist Party, Rosa Luxemburg, maybe says something about her inclinations towards spontaneity.
Thanks a lot, Ankita. I forgot to mention two things. The first is to support and subscribe to historical materialism. And the second is about our inputs. So maybe if you have already attended the previous sessions, you noticed that Ankita referred to also to her talk on Rosa Luxemburg. So we have left it somehow open whether each of us will focus on what we have already said in our talks or say further things. But in case you attend for the first time and you want to elaborate on what is being said, you can just go back to the sessions where each of us have developed their thoughts. The next speaker is Mariana Teixeira.
I think it's Eden's turn, right?
Yes, I apologize for this. Eden, there you go.
Thank you. Yeah, about Lukács, I think for me personally, one thing that's been really important for reading Lukács and today is kind of his analysis of the kind of contradiction between voluntarism and determinism, and his analysis of kind of like trying to steer clear of these two kind of like poles. I see it almost as a kind of like heuristic for using it to kind of start into a dialectic analysis of any kind of given situation. It also, to me, is kind of like really cemented the necessity of organizing in something like a party or a vanguard. And specifically, of course, in the light of the insight that the revolution, the socialist revolution, must be the self must end and be the self-emancipation of the working class, which I still believe is very true to this day. And this kind of follows from the argument that revolutionaries cannot make the revolution out of their pure will, but they do have a role in organizing the working class and bringing together kind of the disparate struggles that exist throughout society. And in doing so, kind of relating to the level of class struggle that is going on in any given locality, even in a place like the Netherlands, we can do that to some extent. But I also wanted to talk a little bit more. So I think that's like theoretically and practically super important, and that any Marxist could benefit from thinking about these things. But also very specifically about my personal experience with Lukács, he has helped me. His writing has helped me to battle a kind of cynicism that can come to haunt me, at least, while trying to organize in often quite non-revolutionary times, and suffering many defeats in doing so. What helped me most was in the organization chapter that Dimitra talked about. Lukács is talking about self-criticism and evaluating past errors for socialists to do, which I also think is like a very important function of democratic centralism. And his analysis is that, we shouldn't believe that events like necessarily happen and therefore, oh, we couldn't have changed the outcome. But at the same time, we also shouldn't assume that errors are simply like individuals failing because they are like the wrong person for the job, or, they have idiosyncrasies within their personality or whatever. Because even though, those things can be true, I think the really important thing is to try to understand the origin of where did these mistakes come from, and asking whether we are applying the right organizational methods to transform our theory kind of into praxis. And I think this is super important when organizing with a group of other people, especially in times of kind of low class struggle. I think it has helped me to be compassionate with myself and with my comrades, and mostly to kind of keep alive a sense of like agency in the organizing you do, to battle a kind of cynical fatalism. So yeah, that's what I wanted to share about reading Lukács today.
Thanks a lot, Eden. Okay, I hope now that I have not confused, I will not continue confusing the order of the speakers, but I think that it's Victor. Perfect.
Yeah. Thanks, Dimitra. Thanks once more to HM for hosting this, and to Paul Reynolds in particular, who has been tirelessly behind the scenes so that it all functions smoothly. I prepared a little text so I don't go over the time, because I have a lot of things to say about this work. I just want to refer to something that appeared in the discussions a lot, was Lukács's difficult relationship with his work, right? The later Lukács's self-criticisms, etc., and which were extensively, masterfully presented today by Konstantin. Whether we agree with Lukács's reluctance to allow HCC to be republished, or whether we think he was too harsh with himself in his 1967 preface or not, there's one thing that is undeniable. This is a book with a very distinct potency to it. When this book falls into the right hands, it puts its readers in a very revolutionary mood. Maybe with the exception of Jürgen Habermas, it had no such effect on him. But for almost everyone else, it's a book that wants to make you go out and change everything. And that's why its author, I think, thought twice about its new edition, and why students were pirating this and other essays of the early 20s from Lukács in France and Germany, for instance, in the pre-68 period. This is not an easy book. It's a dense, theoretically complex work, and it's being pirated. I have a few ideas as to why that is, and this is how I come to my experience and that of other comrades' relationship to this book that I want to share very briefly. So HCC is not the first book on Marxism anyone will read, because it presupposes some knowledge of Marxism and its different currents. But for many people, it's the first book you read as a Marxist that reminds you what it felt like to discover Marx and Engels and Lenin in the first place, what it felt like to read the manifesto, and have it confirmed that the contradictions that always bothered you in this miserable capitalist reality are not immutable. And now, not only do you realize that you can change them, there is a collective subject to bring about that change, the working class. So you're not alone in your opposition to the current state of things and in wanting to change them. So now, because you understand how things work, you know what has to be done, you know, that feeling. So what's specific about discovering HCC is that it magnifies that experience in a way. The impression that this book gives you is that it explains everything. This book, when I read it, I felt this explains everything, because it has such a broad scope of phenomena that it analyzes, from philosophy to class theory to the state to the party. And because reification seems to provide the missing link between the critique of political economy and the critique of everything existing really in this world. So you feel that you suddenly understand everything, and that crucially, you not only can, but you should change everything. And it's, I guess, it reflects very powerfully how theory can change your relationship to reality. So that's at least my experience and why I feel it's still such an impactful book. I just wanted to say a few things about HCC as a book, right? Because we tend to situate it, but we don't talk about the book in its materiality that much. And I think it has a very interesting, there are interesting details to HCC as a book as it came out. It came out in the so-called small revolutionary library by a small left-wing publisher, not a public party publisher. The owner was Felix Weil, who's the person who eventually would fund the Institute for Social Research in Frankfurt. But more important than that, the editor is someone called Wieland Herzfeld, the brother of Helmut Herzfeld. You might know him as John Hartfield, the one brother. And so the artist known for Montage. And this already tells you that this is a publisher that's responsible for a lot of work of a lot of books on art. And it's somewhere between Dadaism and Expressionism, the stuff that they're new objectivity, this kind of current. That's where HCC is published. It's published besides this kind of work. So really in the avant-garde and where art and revolutionary theory occupy the same space, right? I think this tells a lot. And the title of the press is called Der Malik Verlag, or Malik Verlag. So Malik, the publisher. And Der Malik is a novel by someone, a very interesting figure called Else Lasker Schuler. She was a women poet from the Weimar Republic, really fascinating figure. And Der Malik was an epistolary novel from her. It's basically built out of the letters that she sent to Franz Marc, the painter. And the interesting thing is that the narrator, Malik, is the king of Thebes, but also Prince Yusuf, and also the sister of David. So basically, it's this transgender figure that is traveling between historical times and religions. That's the name of the publisher of History and Class Consciousness. And in a way, its patron is someone like Else Lasker Schuler. Look her up. She's definitely worth reading. So just to go back then, this publisher in this book is possible in the world of early Weimar Germany. And that world produced people like Lukács, like the Herzfeld brothers, like Else Lasker Schuler, but that world was destroyed, right? And that doesn't mean that its legacy is worthless, but I think when we think about Lukács' relationship with his book, it's understandable, I think, that when someone who experienced that traumatic break has mixed feelings about a work that was fated to help take all its liberation potentials, and there were many in that universe, and realize them fully. And so we kind of tend to play up Lukács' dilemmas with regards to the Stalinization of the communist movement and how he positioned himself with regards to that. But the struggle against fascism is often forgotten. So starting in the late 20s, that overdetermined everything else. And the perspectives, and Lukács' conclusion was that the perspectives of the 1920s were insufficient. It was insufficient in terms of what the Soviet Union became, but also beyond it, right? Gramsci and the Italians experienced this much more immediately, from a pre-revolutionary situation to a fascist one very quickly, very early. So when I say that, despite what my young self felt when I read History and Class Consciousness, sadly, HCC does not explain everything. Of course, no book can, but it was specifically not enough as in terms of a practical theoretical weapon against the fascistization of several European societies. Not that a book could have stopped that, but so in a way, I feel that the question for Lukács later is, how can you stand by a work that is a product of such a conjuncture? But on the other hand, I would really disagree that he reneges on all the critical impulses of HCC. He absolutely does not. And I just want to finish calling attention to Marxism, to the change of function essay, where Lukács calls for the need for a new aesthetic, right? Marxism to produce a new aesthetic. And I would not, we should not underestimate this as part of the effort of Lukács to continue the legacy of HCC, but also to fight fascist ideology. So his aesthetic raises questions of knowledge, subject-object relations, mimesis, but also ethical questions. So the two sides of the theory-praxis relationship at the heart of HCC. So the search of mediations, which he raises in HCC, for instance, is, I think, reflected in the centrality of the category of the particular, Besonderheit, to his aesthetic reflections. And I just want to finish with this idea that there's a great underestimation of the political and critical potential of these works, precisely because it's seen as just aesthetics. It's definitely not, and it's definitely not reducible to all those critical views on the avant-garde, the one that Lukács was sharing the publisher with, right? So I'll stop there, and just want to thank everyone, all the participants, right? When me and Mariana thought about this, we said, let's just go over these chapters, say a little bit what's in them, and everybody took this way more seriously. And the talks that you listen to, which are wonderful, are the result of that. So thank you so much to my to the other Scheherazades in the marathon. So thank you, Dimitri.
Yeah, thank you, Victor, for this powerful shot. I hope the audience continues watching us and don't go to start right now reading History and Class Consciousness. The next speaker is Giovanni.
Okay, thanks. I will draw directly on Victor's wonderful words. As for me, I've read History and Class Consciousness as a reader of Adorno, and I had arrived to Adorno in turn because I earlier had liked Heidegger. And you might know that it has been suggested that no less than Being and Time of Heidegger is a hidden response to History and Class Consciousness. So this work of Lukács, like all the stream of Western Marxism that followed it, appeared to me as a way of including all of that, of kind of social critique, cultural critique, first of all, critique of reification, but at the same time opening a fully new horizon, new for me at the time, of addressing this kind of cultural criticism. So the possibility of be aligned with a certain modern sensibility and be a Marxist at the same time. This said, yes, as Victor said, History and Class Consciousness is a historically situated work, precisely what it wanted to be. But with the paradox that, as such, it has had a destiny, and it has become the opposite of what it wanted to be, which is a classical. The first reason why to read HCC today is because it's one of the masterpieces, the major masterpieces of 20th century thought. Definitely, in my opinion, the most influent historical important work of 20th century philosophy, and through some mediations also politics in the sense. Virtually no stream of philosophical debates is, with the partial exception of Gramsci, is unrelated to History and Class Consciousness or to the late Lukács, which in turn relates to his earlier self. But with the problem that it seems to be just that, a classical, a basis. I will make the hypothesis that there is a force in HCC that can be actual today, even if even making abstraction from any concrete praxis, and that relates to one topic that paradoxically maybe we hasn't emerged in its full force in our discussion so far, which is the relationship of HCC with Lenin. I think what has to be done in particular is the model for HCC, in the sense that what has to be done postulates a certain primacy, not of theory, but of the intellectual moment, intellectual aspect, including historical concrete analysis over what is simply given. It is my impression that, so to speak, Lukács wanted to provide a philosophy which was adequate to Lenin's political theory, unlike Lenin's own philosophy. Because one thing that I didn't mention in my presentation, I would like to mention now, is that when I compared Lukács to Korsch of the same year, of Marxism and philosophy, Korsch there is bold enough to do something that Lukács is cautious enough not to do, which is to frontally attack materialism and empirical criticism. History and Class Consciousness is a polar opposite philosophically of materialism and empirical criticism, of the idea that knowledge simply mirrors reality. It's my question to Konstantin earlier was formulated in a very abstruse way, but I had this in mind, that Lukács wants to postulate some primacy of a global dialectical look over what is simply given, either on the level of positivism, and so political realism in the worst sense, or on the side of subjective projection, and so voluntarism, spontaneism, and so on. In this sense, I think Lukács can be read still today because, and I will finish by that, it seems to me, he indicates every time with a clarity that is that we find nowhere else in the Marxist tradition. He points to the necessity of distinguishing two different attitudes to reality. One which we might call reified, but also simply analytical. So, and the other one, dialectical, global. And he seems to be saying there are two different levels at each stage. So thinking dialectical isn't the same thing. It isn't at the same level as thinking in a reified way, in a bourgeois way. The organization of the party in the essay on the organization is qualitatively different from what the party organization is in bourgeois parties. Class consciousness for the proletariat is qualitatively different from what it is for other classes, and so on, and so on, and so on. And so I think this is maybe HCC's lesson, to invite us to be smart and detect what is reified. So either voluntarist or determinist, as Aidan was saying, either one or the other, subjectivist or objectivist, in our everyday thinking and politics. And let me just say a half word on a subject I've already mentioned in my presentation, that I think I get more and more convinced that the relationship between early and late Lukács is crucial. I couldn't evaluate it. I had some impressions on it. I had the impression that he, facing fascism, he later sort of abandons this equidistance and approximates bourgeois rationalism at the expense of the critique of reification. It seems to me that the idea of ontology, the idea of Abbil theory of knowledge mirroring reality, all the theoretical reformulations he passes through are the consequence of a diagnosis of changed reality. That praxis is not something so immediate, so close. And so a sort of, not resignation, but acceptance of the given, adequation to the given has to be somehow incorporated into theory. But that would mean, paradoxically, abdicate from that same primacy of the intellectual gaze, of the look on what is simply given. So just because praxis seems impossible, do we have to give up theoretical acquisitions? Adorno, for example, starts from the same problem and it goes the opposite direction. And I would just like to suggest that the triangle, early Lukács, Adorno, late Lukács, might be a very fruitful subject to investigate for us in the future. Thanks.
Thanks for your input, Giovanni. I would give it the title, Why Still Theory? So whenever I talk with people about political activism and theory, I think this is a very convincing way to answer why we need both, actually. The next speaker is Mariana. And just a second, I forgot to mention our comrade Anita Zurtsan, who couldn't attend our sessions today because of private reasons, but yeah, she yeah, punkt. Mariana.
Thanks a lot, Dimitra. Well, I would start also saying that perhaps I got interested in Lukács and history and class consciousness for all the wrong reasons. I mean, I really liked how he appropriated Max Weber, Georg Simmel, and Hegel, because in the beginning of my studies, I was a Marxist, and But I also found interesting things in Weber and Zeno and in Hegel. And it seemed to some extent impossible to draw things from these authors if you're a Marxist. And when I found History and Class Consciousness, I was impressed and I was shocked that someone could have the first chapter as claiming Orthodox Marxism and be so heavily influenced by these other authors as well. And I found that fascinating and intriguing. And of course, there's a lot of contradictions, but what interested me was that Lukács was not afraid of the contradictions. So he immersed in these contradictions and tried to find the mediations. Whether he was 100% successful or not, I think obviously not, but like Victor said, I don't think that's possible because reality is contradictory. So if he had written a book that was not, it wouldn't be also adequate to reality. So it was a very huge impact on me reading the book. And I will disagree with Victor that he could have written it without Weber. I know you were maybe exaggerating a little bit to make the point that Engels is an important figure as well. But I really think that it's very inspiring that you don't simply say, these guys are bourgeois thinkers, we're not even going to read them. And I think that's very powerful for the time and for today as well. And then after I wrote my master thesis precisely on his appropriation of Weber, and then I stopped working with Lukács for around more than 10 years. And now with the centennial of the book, I even made it as one of my New Year's resolutions of last year. I want to organize a special issue about the centennial of the book. And it made me reread and re-engage with the book and really find some stuff that, I don't know, I think maturing also and reading other stuff, when you go back to the book, you find things that you didn't even notice the first time. So it's been an incredible experience. And Mitter and I met by chance in Berlin. I mean, he was there and let's have a coffee. We knew already each other from a conference on Weber first, and then the conference on Lukács in Budapest. And we were both with this in mind. He wanted to organize an event and I wanted to organize a special issue. So the two things came together and we decided to do both things together. And I'm really glad that this happened because this is a great group, which I want to give credit to Victor for putting all these people together because he knew everyone. And I think it's a very powerful group because it's very theoretically rigorous, and people have, as you have seen in the talks, a lot of great interpretations, but also because we are almost from peripheries or semi-peripheries. So I think that's a very refreshing way of looking at the book from this multiple perspective of people from different places, and most of them peripheries of the world. And we also were interested in making something that was more gender balanced than a lot of Lukács events that at least I have been to, and I think that gives it a very special characteristic. And I'd like perhaps when Victor said, when the book falls in the right hands, and that reminded me of a text by Edward Said, the Palestinian-American literary scholar who wrote a text called Traveling Theories. And he talks about how Lukács's theory in HCC got sort of domesticated and lost its revolutionary spark when it was appropriated afterwards. So he's talking mostly about Lucien Goldman and Raymond Williams in the post-war, and how it became an academic topic and didn't have that revolutionary potential that the book wanted to have at the time. And that's one of the consequences of the theory traveling from one place to the other, right? And then more than 10 years afterwards, he writes another text called Traveling Theory Reconsidered, or something to this effect. And he reflects on how his theory actually got the first text had a kind of pessimistic interpretation that all theories, when they have something that is living in them because they're responding to the events of the time, and when you transpose it to another time in another place, it doesn't resonate the same way, and it ends up losing its fire. But then, more than 10 years later, he writes another text and considers that the history and class consciousness was reignited in the writings of other authors. He mentions Adorno's theory of music and Fanon, Frantz Fanon, Black Skin, White Masks. And we can agree or not whether in Adorno we find this revolutionary spark, or I'm not going to go into that, or whether it influenced Fanon, which is not at all evident. But I think the idea is very interesting, that something that was written in, Hungary in the late 1910s, early 1920s, can resonate in so many different places. And I think that's something that we're trying to do here, to try to reread the book with this intention of grasping what it still has of its capacity to inflammate our desire for organizing and for changing things. So I hope that this is a step in this direction, and the fact that we're reading it and finding stuff in it that help us to think about present things, present situations. In the talks we had, for example, the discussion of feminist standpoint or environmental questions. Things that were not at all clearly debated by the book, but we can find there some resources, some challenges to think, not answers, but challenges. And I think that's a merit of the book, is that it pushes us to deal with these mediations and the contradictions that are not easily resolved. So that's what I had to say. I also want to really, really thank all of you for accepting our invitation to this marathon to discuss some of the forgotten chapters of history and class consciousness. I think this has also been crucial for me, including because I had this tendency to focus on the reification chapter, and this has been very eye-opening and extremely interesting to hear about the other chapters as well. And that's it. Thank you all. And thanks for Historical Materialism for allowing us to recreate the marathon now online and share it with more people and receive the questions in their YouTube channel, and Paul that's behind the scenes. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Mariana. It's also good that you mentioned the special issue on history and class consciousness in the journal Dissonantia, because I forgot that. And yes, so our contributions from the marathon will also have their place in a special section of the issue. And big thanks goes, of course, to Mariana and Victor for this possibility. I think it's my turn to say a few words, and I would like as well to thank HM and once again Victor and Mariana for bringing us together. I will start by saying some words about my personal encounter with Lukács, as some of you also did. This happened 10 years ago, I think, while I was still living in Athens, and I was back then still a student of classical philology. No institutional, at least, connection to social theory and philosophy, but I was organized, and then this book landed in my hands. And to be honest, I could not understand much, but it had this kind of impact that I would call maybe an Adornian impact, that something attracts you precisely because you don't understand it. So somehow it left something. It left. It was like a promise that I would come back, I think. And indeed, several years later in Berlin, I had to read for an essay in the philosophy masters, the chapter on reification, and especially the antinomies of the bourgeois thought. And it was a big flash because it gave me answers to questions I had for a long time, and somehow I also regretted not having read this chapter and the book earlier. And I think the last station goes back to the encounter with my comrades Kostas and Alexandros. I have to say that I owe them a big thanks, because I think that they played a very important role for me to continue studying Lukács, and then after this also my encounter with Victor and the conferences of HM in London and Athens. So this is more or less how I landed up also in this marathon. And I think regarding the more specific contents, I will not be able to zoom out in this the way the previous speakers did, but I have a quite specific question in my mind, and this is what would Lukács say about the party form if he was sitting today among us? I'm drawing on this point because my presentation was on the organization chapter, and although being myself to a certain extent convinced that party form is a still meaningful, crucial organizational form for the workers' movement, at some points I am wondering whether this chapter should not also be, let's say, more inclusive regarding other forms of organization. And yeah, I say this also having in mind discussions, debates of nowadays regarding organization forms. People like Rodrigo Nunes from Brazil talk about a certain ecology of political organization, meaning by this that not every organization has to be reduced to the party form, but we can conceive it more of being like an ecosystem of different organizations who work, let's say, work together and fulfill different functions. Yes, so this is a question that for me is still open, but it's also true that Lukács later will refer to the workers' councils and will not only focus on the party form. And to say a last word, which is I think, quite a generic comment, but nonetheless, it's true for me. I think I have not met any other Marxist philosopher that manages so well to throw these bridges between theory and practice. Like, I have the feeling always when I read HCC that Lukács calls for a leap into action, but without downplaying at all the intellectual stakes of the thing. And I think that this is not easy to do, not so easy to manage to thematize both the theoretical and the practical stakes without downplaying the one or the other pole. So thanks to all of my comrades here in the round for the possibility to attend to this marathon and for our discussions, which I hope will continue. I think that now it's the last speaker to talk is Alexandros.
Dimitra, since I don't know, Alexandros might have some technical problems, I can speak instead of him.
Mm-hmm. Let's do that.
Alexandros is frozen. Okay, he's there. Okay. Alexandros, whatever, in which order you prefer, I can. Okay. I would like to begin, since Anita Zurchan, our friend and comrade from Budapest, is not here, I would like to begin by quoting Anita. So this is Anita's quote. Right-wing governments can destroy statues, but to destroy the memory and the intellectual legacy of Lukács is impossible. This is, end of quote, this is part of Anita's report after the International Georg Lukács Conference organized in Budapest in 2017. And I mention this because also for part of the team that is here in the marathon, but for other people as well from many different countries of the world, I think that this International Georg Lukács Conference in Budapest in 2017 has been a defining moment. There might have been many conferences about Lukács, but I would like to refer to this specific conjuncture when his legacy was specifically attacked by the right-wing government and the extreme right-wing groups. They removed the statue of Lukács from a central square of Budapest. They shut down the Lukács archive, which has been a breathing space for Marxists and generally for researchers in Budapest. The old Lukács house, always open for anybody, always helpful for creative research. So it was a defining moment because it was not just a conference, a scientific, an academic conference. It was a political statement, and part of this statement has been the protest in the square where Lukács' statue used to be before it was removed. And part of this statement has also been the fact that we remained faithful to what we said at this conference, that it will not be an one-off academic event, that we will build connections between each other, we will build bridges between the different traditions within Lukács' scholars, and most importantly, between militants that read Lukács in order to get inspired, in order to get, how Eden described it very well, in order not to get cynical in the world that we're living in. So the fact that 6 years later, we have this online marathon with 10 contributors from 7 countries, the team became even bigger. This is the most important thing. And if the International Georg Lukács Conference was the one defining moment, The other one was the annual historical materialism conferences in London and in other cities around the world that gave us a platform to have panels to discuss Lukács in a very creative way, in a way that is always understanding Marxism in an open-ended way, discussing together with other traditions within Marxism. We had panels together with comrades that come from the Althusserian tradition. We tried to combine criticism. This is how we understand Marxism, and this is how we understand Marxism as philosophy of praxis as well. So, I mean, if the discussion about totality has to do with building connections, I mean, the political translation of this capacity is also to build connections between young researchers and intellectuals who feel in the absence of other platforms, in the absence of a communist international, if you want to put it that way, feel very lonely, especially in countries where there are the left is defeated, the parties of the left are degenerated, etc., etc. So this is the first point I wanted to make, and you know, if I know that we can debate for hours about the later Lukács, but what I find very inspiring is the fact that Lukács could have been the political commissar in the Hungarian Soviet Republic and in the Hungarian Red Army, and at the same time was commenting on May 68. This is a unique case in the 20th century, and the fact that even at the last years of his life, he was committed to the project of the renaissance of Marxism. And I think that this is exactly what we need to build nowadays, because Lukács was very much concerned that there's this lack of theory and that Marxists are running behind the events and theory comes after the events. And Lukács said that this is not this is actually a little more than the rationalization of their surprise. I think that this is what we're actually feeling after many political events that are going on the last decades, that we come after the events. We never have a theory to prepare for the events. We come after them and not even have creative assessments of the events. We try to rationalize the surprise that goes from enthusiasm to despair and vice versa, and mostly despair, not so much enthusiasm. So I think that trying to, the message that we're trying to send with this marathon is that reading Lukács, returning to Lukács is not about some academic freaks. It's something vital for political militants in order to find inspiration for day-to-day issues that they're struggling with. But also, it's a message also about the responsibility of intellectuals. This is, Lukács was very strict when he talked about many intellectuals who have taken up residence in the Grand Hotel Abyss. The hotel with all the comforts on the edge of abyss, of nothingness, of absurdity. This is what we are also experiencing right now, with especially with the neoliberal, the triumphalism of neoliberalism in the universities. We see more and more intellectuals who are just, going with the wind. So it might not be a Grand Hotel Abyss, it might be an Airbnb abyss, but it's the same absurdity, the same sense of nothingness. So we try to take this responsibility. Lukács said that we need an international trust of minds. If we need this thing, we need platforms to talk together and always build this kind of connections. Before finishing these thoughts, I would also like to stress the fact that the research on Lukács is still open. I find it extremely intriguing, the fact that in the 90s some researchers found Lukács's manuscript in the archives of the Communist Party of Soviet Union, and that was the defense of history and class consciousness. And it was most probably drafted by Lukács in 1925 or 26 and was never published. And it's even more intriguing the fact that Lukács never mentioned it. No, in all the trajectory that Konstantin tried to present today in order to reach the 1967 preface, and in this preface itself and in the numerous interviews that Lukács gave in the 60s, he never mentioned this manuscript. And this manuscript gave us the possibility to discuss in a different way, to return to history and class consciousness and discuss in a different way about all the issues that were debated in this marathon. Of course, for me, it was also a lesson. In what way? When it was published in English, the manuscript, John Rees wrote the foreword, and Zizek also commented on the book. So when I first read it, I was really enthusiastic about Zizek's reading of Lukács. She was suggesting there that there is a link between Gramsci, Lenin, Lukács, very, very creative ideas. I don't have time to expand, but read it, the afterword Zizek wrote in Talisman Dialectic. And the lesson that I learned a decade later, or even more years now, after the first time that I read Talisman Dialectic, is that an intellectual could refer to Lukács, could write very, very creative comments on Lukács's work, and at the same time fail so badly politically. It's not the time here to criticize Zizek, but that was the lesson I learned from the fact that I liked so much the afterword, and I find so, okay, I don't want to go further to this point. And so some ideas just to think about them for the future. It's very interesting that we are here from from many different countries and continents. So I think that it would be so interesting to discuss how Lukács's work was received in our countries, the different traditions of Lukács, the different readings of Lukács, or the political importance of Lukács in the different countries we're living in. And it is a challenge that the next initiatives would have even more friends and comrades from many more countries and even more continents, I would dare to say. And another idea is also to expand these discussions with readings of Lukács that do not come from the Lukácsian tradition. It might be even more challenging to debate in a comradely manner, but it would be even more interesting for a Marxist marathon on history and class consciousness with different readings coming from the Althusserian tradition, from other thinkers from the Frankfurt School, and etc., etc. Last point, I said in my presentation that somebody that interviewed Lukács Bernard Daft said to him at the it was one of the last interviews in the early 70s, Comrade Lukács, you seem rather pessimistic. And Lukács said, no, I'm optimistic for the 21st century. So please allow me to finish with just one quote from Lukács, if I find it. It has to do with the big jumps in history. Lukács says that we must not forget that history takes some big jumps. I saw the collapse of the Habsburg and Romanov empires. They looked stable and seemed everlasting in their time. Much depends on every communist being conscious of their task. I think that this is what we should bear in mind in order not to become cynical. Thank you. I don't know if I lost the time, but thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Kostas, for the inspiring insights. So I think we have maximum 20 minutes left so that we also proceed to the Q&A. But before this, Alexandros will say some words too.
So, hi everyone. I think that I will be really brief because also the internet connection is acting up. First of all, really quickly, something like my personal, 8 years ago, regarding Lukács, I had only read the book on Lenin, but I somehow became part of a group that was supposed to translate Beyond Capital by Meszaros in Greek. And of course, that project never came to fruition, but it led to an enlightening experience for me, because at some point I realized that without reading History and Class Consciousness, I could never understand and translate Meszaros, and that changed everything at that point. I think one of the most, let's say, attractive points of History and Class Consciousness is that Lukács poses the million-dollar question that always troubles leftists and Marxists from 1923 to 2023, and it's the question: why doesn't the working class revolt spontaneously against the socio-political system that so obviously is exploitative, is oppressive, and all that stuff? And Lukács poses the question in a double manner. At one time, he's historically situated, as Victor said, because he wants to address the question of the working class in his era within Western advanced capitalist countries, but at the same time, he offers us a framework to work and answer the same question today. So Lukács calls for a conceptualization of the capitalist mode of production as a totality, and I think that's really interesting, as the notion of reification really at some point seems to tie everything together. Ideology, consciousness, politics are tied with the study of the production process and the emerging practices of Taylorism and scientific management. And I think that Lukács is the first Marxist to understand that the transformation of capitalism does not pertain solely to the monopoly form of the corporation or to imperialist conflicts, but the transformation of capitalism should also involves inquiring the ways that capitalism organizes in fundamental ways the everyday life of the working class. And I think also that Gramsci is the second Marxist to actually engage with this question. So in that way, Lukács builds this super theory of super everything, also as Lukács mentioned, that seems so powerful. And it's one of the reasons that this book is so infectious. And moreover, even today, when we are in a post-Fordist, post-Taylorist, post-modern, post-whatever capitalist, still any critical effort to understand what is going on around us necessarily has to go back to Lukács. And this has been really brilliantly demonstrated by Christian Fuchs, who shows that we can and we should use the notion of reification to approach social media, big data, the way that our online existence is also a reified existence in a new manner. And at the same time, I think that it's really indicative the way that Lukács was rediscovered in 1960s and 1970s. Of course, part of the answer is that the book was translated in English, but also I think it's that at this precise point in time, the working class, the youth movement revolted not only against exploitation in general, but exploitation as it is expressed particularly in production processes, in the way that we are becoming disconnected from the way that we make things, from the way that we interact with other persons. And I think that's, I think it's really indicative of the power of this book. So to close it up and come back to the chapter on Orthodox Marxism, which I was tasked with presenting. The answer that Lukács gives, why does the answer on reification and all that stuff, at the same time is strictly positioned within Orthodox Marxism, the Marxism of Lenin and the Third International, and at the same time challenges this orthodoxy. And I think this is an emblematic feature of Lukács, and one of the reasons that is really so fun to read Lukács and also read about Lukács, because Lukács throughout his life and throughout his work constantly works this really fine line between the party line and his own. between orthodox and unorthodox Marxism, never really fitting in either place. It's really, I think it's extremely difficult to label Lukács as a kind of Marxist, and I think that's one of the reasons that Perry Anderson's book on Western Marxism that terms Lukács as the father of Western Marxism, I think it's really a wrong way to portray his work. But this contradiction within Lukács' life is also apparent in his definition of orthodox Marxism. And this is what makes it so provocative and so interesting at the same time, because to be an orthodox Marxist, you have to remain loyal to Marx and Marxism, but only as a method of understanding and acting. And at the same time, you have to be critical, you have to be self-reflective, you have to be alert on the ways that social reality changes and undermines specific passages and propositions set forth by Marx, by Lenin, and so on. And I think that's a really difficult path to walk upon. But also, I think at some point, in order to remain a Marxist, to remain a revolutionary, this is the only path that's available to us. And I think that's clearly what Lukács was trying to say at this point. So that's it.
Yeah, I think this was a nice closure of our part. We can now proceed to the Q&A, and we already have two questions. The first one is rather philological, I think can get answered quickly by Giovanni, I guess. It's a question. No, I will anyways read the question and let's see if someone can answer. It's a question by Bertzog, Lukács 1954 on Lenin's materialism and empirocriticism. Do we have the title and of the English? I'm not sure I understand the question, but I guess it's about when it got, if it is translated in English, and if you have any further infos about this publication, any of you.
I don't. I was speaking about the implicit polemic in HCC, so in 23, against materialism and empiricism. So I have no clue, unfortunately, about this issue.
Okay, so Giovanni was not talking about a publication of Lukács on Lenin's materialism and empirocriticism. The second question is again for Giovanni. Good point about the qualitative difference of Workers' Party, the intellectual, reflective nature of what it should be.
It's a suggestive commentary. It's not a question, and I really wouldn't know what to add to it. So
that's fine.
Maybe someone else.
Or if Bertzog is still watching us, can reformulate the question. Yes, I think for the time being, we don't have any further questions from.
We had a question that was posted on the chat, on the comments of session 1.
Oh yes.
Do you want me to read it? Victor said he wanted to say something about it, so I'm going to read the question.
Yes, I will just read the whole note. Okay. So would anyone be willing, we are talking about this comment, right? Would anyone be willing to offer some commentary on Lukács' famous footnote 6, which allegedly drew a sharp distinction between so-called objective dialectics and so-called subjective dialectics? This has been a prominent distinction adopted by Western Marxism but was later undermined by Lukács himself in The Destruction of Reason. John Bellamy Foster has emphasized this heavily in his theoretical works on Marxism's contribution to critical human ecology. If panelists have any commentary on these topics more broadly, I'd be interested in hearing them. Thanks. So subjective and objective dialectics.
Yeah, thanks for the question. The references to footnote 6, this is a footnote already in the chapter, What is Orthodox Marxism? And it's the footnote of discontent, we could call it, because this put Lukács in caused trouble for Lukács immediately. Konstantin can correct me here, but I'm not sure if it's Rudas or the Baehring who also mentioned this footnote specifically to complain that Lukács's dialectic is idealist because it abandons any kind of material determination or determination by the material world to his dialectical thought. So let me just read the footnote. It is of the first, and I'm going to read it in English. It is of the first importance to realize that the method is limited here to the realms of history and society. So he's talking about the dialectical Marxism that he is a proponent of. This is the English translation. There's already a problem here because so it's of first importance to realize that the method is limited here to historical social reality. That's the literal translation from the German. Not the realms of history and society as if they were realms first and as if they were separated. Lukács does not see things like that. But anyway, continuing with the reading, the rest of the translation is fine. The misunderstandings that arise from Engels' account of dialectics can in the main be put down to the fact that Engels, following Hegel's mistaken lead, extended the method to apply also to nature. However, the crucial determinants of dialectics, the interaction of subject and object, the unity of theory and practice, the historical changes in the reality underlying the categories as the root cause of changes in thought, etc., are absent from our knowledge of nature. Unfortunately, it's not possible to undertake a detailed analysis of these questions here. And boy, would is he right that in a way, so how will I address this? I just want to give you a few, I'm going to address John Bellamy Foster's reading of this and what the consequence was, give you two passages, one from History and Class Consciousness and one from Taylorism and Dialectic that refer back to it. And then I'm going to segue into something that Giovanni asked me in the first day, which is a question about what happens to self-reflexivity when Lukács brings nature back in the form of, like Giovanni put it, when the given becomes a more substantive, when the given assumes a more resilient, let's say, status in his thought than in History and Class Consciousness. But just to go back to how this footnote is interpreted, John Bellamy Foster sees this footnote as the origin of Marxism's or Western Marxism's inability to integrate an ecological perspective and to integrate nature into its view of social transformation, leading also to he points that in Soviet Marxism there are other issues, but less so in this regard. And this is an example of what I was referring to earlier with the notion of the power of this book. The idea that this footnote is responsible for a whole section of Marxism being incapable of integrating an ecological perspective is, I think, exaggerated. It's understandable because this book is so influential, but it can't be right? It's too much to put on Lukács's tab in a way, is to make him responsible for it. And I think, again, the more interesting question is, why is it so important for Lukács at that moment, in that conjuncture, and against the adversaries that he has, to draw us a sharp separation between a dialectics of nature and a social historical dialectics, and especially to emphasize this moment of self-activity and the moment of interaction between subject and object the fact that reality has an effect on the subject permanently, and the subject as such an effect on reality is permanently in interaction with it, and that you can't have this, that apparently nature cannot have this for itself moment, right? It can only have an in itself moment. This is the way that he will address this in Taylism and Dialectic. And he'll have a bit of a different view on this later in life. The question, more interesting question than, is he right here, what's his relationship to Engels? This is something that Giovanni also addressed with in the case of Engels's view of how, I'll go back to this, how the notion of the scientist's experiment is the model for a non-contemplated view of reality, that Lukács criticizes this, and Giovanni explained why. The more important question is if we can integrate an ecological perspective into HCC or not. And I believe we do. I, in a way, also believe the ecological movement desperately needs history and class consciousness, even if it's not enough, right? Because the history, the ecological movement is ringing exactly with questions of how do you conceptualize nature as something that is not external? How do you talk about ecological politics and ecological transformation without externalizing nature, and therefore already entering into a kind of an estranged or a contemplative relationship to it? These are precisely the questions of history and class consciousness. And he will find in praxis and also in the revolutionary subject, the mediation to go beyond this kind of tension between subject and object, right? And I feel with the ecological movement, the question of who is the revolutionary subject and what exactly constitutes ecological praxis or a new ecological mode of production, these are the central issues, and maybe history and class consciousness can help us think about them. But just to say that this is not a external ecologification of history and class consciousness. In page 185 of the English edition and 244 of the German one, this is a quote that I mentioned in my talk, Lukács very explicitly says that that a non-reified relationship to nature is part of the revolutionary program. And so the quote is, thus we see that the road to an understanding of pre-capitalist societies with a non-reified structure could not be opened until historical materialism had perceived that the reification of all man's social relation is both a product of capitalism and hence also an ephemeral historical phenomenon. Then he says, for only now, with the prospect of reestablishing non-reified relations between man and man and nature, could those factors in primitive pre-capitalist formations be discovered in which these non-reified forms were present, albeit in the service of quite different functions. So without going back and also valuing pre-capitalist societies as not necessarily behind in this particular aspect, but there can be a perspective of a non-reified relationship to nature. Then in Taylism and Dialectic, in page 131 of the English edition and 74 of the German one, he directly addresses the question of the metabolism with nature, and why is this missing in his work, and whether he underestimates it or he sees the question of, is another form of this metabolism actually a total overcoming of the natural boundaries? And it is not, right? So here's the quote. Again, he begins with historical materialism's peculiar role. Only historical materialism cares to work out the real origin and therefore the concrete essence of the categories of our being and our consciousness. Forms of thought, accepted in their immediacy as natural, as eternal, are elucidated as products of the social historical process of development. Just how deeply the historically changing, therefore historically ephemeral process of capitalist exchange of matter with nature, of capitalism, metabolism with nature, determines our present knowledge of nature, and where those categories that determine the metabolic exchange of any society with nature begin, are questions for individual research. This will probably show that some categories that appear today as eternal, as categories directly taken from nature, e.g. work and physics, are actually historical, determined by the specific exchange or the specific metabolism between capitalist society and nature. So Lukács, this is a very interesting quote because he raises this question. It's just a matter of looking into this matter of what is distinctive of the capitalist metabolism with nature, and what are its ideological effects in how we see nature and how we understand science and some scientific concepts. and what is the nature of this metabolism in general. And it's not clear if he says this is a question for individual research, but in a way he's implying that we will only really know when we transcend this form of exchange of metabolism with nature. We can't fully know what a non-alienated relationship to nature is while we're still under the capitalist mode of production, because our categories are infested by reified forms. But that, in a way, the climate emergency tells us that if Lukács says these are questions for individual research, we better give answers to them. Right now, we know that we have to give answers to what does a non-reified metabolism with nature, non-commodifying metabolism with nature look like. This is a central issue. I think I could maybe stop here if there are more questions without going into the whole self-reflect, the question from Giovanni, not to go too long. Lukács will go into this problem of what that exchange with nature looks like beyond alienation. But maybe I'll give space to other thoughts and or even ask a question. What do you guys think? Or like go into a defense of the old Lukács directly.
Is there anyone?
Maybe in the next marathon.
Yeah.
Would someone in the round like to add something to what Victor said on?
Yeah, I would like to make a really brief comment because it's also the part on Orthodox Marxism, and it was this footnote was also discussed in the first part of the marathon. I think what's the most problematic point of this footnote is not so much the question of interaction of subject and object, but the historical changes in reality. And I think that's also what part of Foster is correctly pointing out, that Lukács is building, at this point at least, an understanding of nature that is ahistorical. And this also contradicts with the ecological movement and all the understanding of nature that has been developed since. But I think what's really important for Lukács at this point is that he wants to build upon the schism between the Third and the Second International, and he feels that these passages from Engels and also the passage on the experiment as being the contemplative mode of thinking par excellence is what Lukács points out as elements of the old way of thinking that can be found in Engels' work, and he wants to point out and correct this part. But at the same time, as we also discussed in the first part of the marathon, Lukács, when he elaborates on this point and when he discusses nature in Talisman and Dialectic, and he builds this notion of simpler and more complex forms of dialectic, he seems to have a really much more deep understanding of the dialectics between society and nature. And in that sense, I think that this footnote has been heavily discussed, but this is not indicative of the way that Lukács understood the dialectics of nature.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Alexandros, for this comment. I told you that we would finish at 11, but we still have some minutes for a last question that goes to Eden, Ankita, and Mariana, and is the following one. Legacy of HCC for feminism today, specifically for social reproduction theory. So whoever wants to start can do.
Okay, maybe just a few sentences. This marathon is really a marathon in a true sense of the meaning. Yes, I think we already discussed this, but I think that it's really important to point out that the concept of totality regarding the combination of productive and reproductive sphere in unitary sense is really important. And it is not something that is only implicit there. Many comrades and theoreticians already pointed out that this is really an extremely interesting interpretation of Lukács, while thinking about the concept of nature in one sense, and how can be interpreted in terms of changes through the social and historical sense is really important, since there we have the whole range of questions regarding the gender and nature. And this is also really important, I think, because it cannot be separated in terms of the historicity, changes, and exceptionally when we think about the gender as a social relation. So I think that there are two main points in a kind of Lukács feminism. One is definitely pointed to the questions of what is the nature? Is it something metaphysical? Is it changeable? Is it a social relation? What is the history of gender? And the second point is definitely thinking more in terms simultaneously incorporating the question of capitalism and patriarchy, or the sphere of production and reproduction in one unitary, not just dual manner that is usually brought about many feminist traditions. So yes, for the next marathon, we should argue also in that, I would say, path, especially underlining the importance, really the importance for the unitary theory going through the Lukács, yes.
Thanks, El.
Oh,
Yeah.
sorry.
There you go.
Mariana also had some very interesting thoughts about, for example, intersectionality and Lukács' standpoint. And if you want to talk more about that, I'd be also very interested. And I also wanted to repeat something we talked about, that, from my perspective, I think what Lukács can maybe really bring to some feminist theory, specifically in the realm of kind of standpoint theory, is the way Lukács really looks at the concrete kind of content of the relationship of exploitation, oppression, and reification to kind of come to this idea of a standpoint, or to explain kind of what the epistemic dimension is there. And I think, Nancy Hartsock in feminist standpoint theory really tried to lay the groundwork for doing something similar. But I think that project kind of took a different direction after that, kind of letting go of really describing the contents of the relations. And I think that is something that reading Lukács could maybe help us do also in feminist theory.
Yes. Thank you, Victor, for the question, and very interesting things said by Jankica and Eden. So the question of the relation with social reproduction theory is something that is on my horizon that I want to engage more. So I couldn't give you an answer on this topic, but what I could say is that I think the idea of reification is very is something that we have to engage more when thinking about feminism. But I'm also very interested not only on the legacy from Lukács to feminism, but the other way around. So how can feminism help us read the book, and in that sense of sparking a fire in it? And I think this introduction of the idea of reproduction as together with production, as Jankica mentioned, is crucial. And then the challenge would be to understand what kind of reification appears in the realm of reproduction. Is it different from the reification in the realm of production? Is it not? What are the political implications of that? I think that's a question that is very interesting. So thanks for the question.
Thanks a lot for sharing your thoughts, three of you. I think we can slowly close our session, maybe with some last thoughts, comments by Victor and Mariana, if you like.
Okay. Well, again, just want to thank HM, Paul Reynolds, and everybody that's participated and the audience. If you're catching this live or later, we're so happy to have been able to do this and then done it twice, and we'll also do it in writing. So again, thanks so much. If I just to end with a few final thoughts, one more, in an academic direction, one in a more political one. Well, first, I hope this encouraged you to read all of History Class Consciousness from page 1 to page 500 or whatever its size is in your translation. And I'd like to make an appeal for a new translation in English. Doing this, we've been in dialogue. There are several issues with this translation. It's not, again, it's not without merit, but some issues can have direct effects in some directions that the discussion takes in the various languages. And also an appeal to translate the earlier versions of these articles. It's very, very interesting to compare the work, and because that's a very easy way to make HCC seem more of a living document, because you clearly see what he revised. Sure. Also, the ultra-left formulation of the earlier ones will maybe be seductive. So that's a possibility of their publication, but so be it. So that's a more scholarly, let's say, or philological demand. The other one is maybe to read this in your party, read this in your organization, read the organization chapter in a movement, because the phrase is, organization is the form of the mediation between theory and praxis. But so organization is the form, but the fact that he says it's the form means there are perhaps different forms. So read that in a different context with comrades who maybe don't know the work or other parts of it. And it always has, because again, this is a book with a potency to it and an impact. I guess these are my thoughts. Thank you so much. And I'll open the floor to Madi to close the marathon.
Thanks, Victor. I would just like to end by thanking again all of you for participating. I think the first time that I read History and Class Consciousness was in a collective, and now reading again together with people, I think it makes a lot of difference. And it was very interesting to prepare for the presentations in HM Athens together. So we met a couple of times online and discussed our presentations. I normally don't do that for conferences. So I feel like this is a more, even in the academic side, is a little bit less an individual reading and presentation of a text. So I really enjoyed this experience, both there in Athens and now in this digital form. I hope you have also enjoyed. I hope everyone that is watching felt at least inspired to read the book and to engage with it. And thanks once again for Historical Materialism and Paul. And if you can support Historical Materialism, all that they do is very productive, and this would not have happened if it wasn't for Historical Materialism. So thanks once again. Thanks to everyone who ran this marathon with us. And we'll let you know once we have a new date for Anita to present her chapter as well. We're thinking of other stuff to do together with that, maybe discussing Taylism and the dialectic or some other works as well. So stay tuned for news on that. Please check out also when our special issue is out for Dissonancia. We'll also let everyone know that that's out. And now I know that it's very late, especially in Greece for Costas. I think it's past midnight. So I think it's a good time for us to end this part of the marathon, but I hope we can meet again and do more stuff together in the future. Thank you all. And thank you, Dimitra, for chairing the session.
Yeah, thanks a lot also to you, Mariana, and to everyone. Actually, a marathon run by a middle amateur runner lasts 4 to 5 hours, and I think we have done 10. So let's celebrate our accomplished double marathon. Yeah, thank you so much, and see you soon.